Today's show is brought to you by locally owned and operated Highland Rim Speedway. Highland Rim Speedway is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year with great short track door-to-door stock car racing in a safe, family-friendly atmosphere. Visit their website at highlandrim.com. From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
Microcasting for your city. Talkopolis.
From the family grocery hauler to fire-breathing racing engines, the one name you need to know is USA Motor and Machine, located at 51 Cleveland Avenue in Nashville, Tennessee. Give them a call at 615-726-3725 or at usamotorandmachine.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to Pit Pass. Joe Williams and Larry Woody. Larry, good things are happening here as we get ready to go to Daytona. NASCAR this week will do their 2013 class inductions into the Hall of Fame. Some big names on here: Buck Baker, Cotton Owens, Herb Thomas, Leonard Wood, who a lot of folks do not know. Leonard Wood, the father of the modern-day pit stop. When NASCAR started going to long races at racetracks, he figured out you've got to get over the wall, get there quick, get everything done. Leonard Wood. If you enjoy watching pit stops and pit stop competitions, you can thank Leonard Wood. He's the one who came up with it. And, of course, from another driver angle, Rusty Wallace won a Cup title and is now going to be in the Hall of Fame.
Joe, I've been watching some of these documentaries on the Speed Channel that NASCAR, the Hall of Fame, has taped about these guys, and it's fascinating. I knew some of this. I'd followed Buck Baker, actually interviewed Buck. He was still racing when I started covering it. I knew Wood by association around the tracks, and I remember covering Rusty Wallace when he came in and raced at the old fairgrounds once in the, I guess it's the ARCA series, run an ARCA race out at the fairgrounds.
Or ASA race one,
ASA,
both, yeah.
I think it was ASA. It was an ASA race. And so, but even having kept up with some of these guys over the years, the documentaries are still fascinating. As you say, you learn things about these guys that you didn't know, and it's intriguing, and I think it should be required watching for all modern NASCAR drivers. I think these kids who come in now and make $10 million a year, they have no appreciation for the old guys who raced for pennies and built a sport to where these guys can come in and make millions, and now these guys are living in nursing homes around the country. So it's great. I think these are great inductions. And again, I think that the modern drivers at Daytona should be forced to sit down and watch all these documentaries to find out who was responsible for them making the big money and their yachts and airplanes and their toys that they've got today.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Rusty, and I'm thinking, you think about the talent that came out of the old ASA series back in the middle 80s. You had Rusty, Mark Martin, Alan Kulwicki, who won a title. All these guys came out of the Midwest Series that was basically the equivalent of Uncle Bob's All-Pro Series here in the South. And now these guys are wound up in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to go ahead and tell you my sentimental favorite, and I'm really, really hopeful. But I would love to see Mark Martin win the Daytona 500 just to be able to put it on his resume. And I got to be honest, it's easy for me to sit here and say this, but I think if I'm running second and he's on my tail, I might just open the door a little bit and give him a chance.
Depends on, I guess, who that person is leading. It depends on how bad they want it. But yeah,
well, I was going to say,
it'd be the feel-good story of the year if Mark could win one, because obviously he's never going to win the championship now. He's going down in history as the greatest driver in NASCAR never to win a championship. So that's decided because he's not going around a full schedule. But yeah, Daytona 500 would be a nice little exclamation point on what's been a great career.
And the story when he makes the Hall of Fame, because he will, the second, third trip back, the things that he's overcome, he and Arlene staying married for so long, right beside each other. It's a really great story.
Yeah, professional problems. At one time he was bankrupt, had to sell his racing team. Personal problems, overcame a lot of difficulties in his personal life, private life. So yeah, it's a great story. Somebody ought to write a book about him.
You would be a good candidate.
I've already written one.
Oh, okay.
The Mark Martin story. No, he's an inspiration. He's one of the all-time greats, and he will be in the Hall of Fame someday.
Sure. He's got to be.
But these are great. These are good, awfully good selections here. I got to know Buck Baker a little. As I say, Buck was still racing when I was started covering the sport for the Tennessee, and he came out to the fairgrounds. I remember talking to Buck out at the fairgrounds. He was talking about how proud he was of his little boy Buddy. He thought he might make a race driver someday.
I was going to say.
And Buddy was on the NASCAR documentary, the Buck Baker segment the other night. I was watching it, and Buddy, when he started talking about his dad, began to tear up.
Really?
I mean, it's so emotional. He's talking about his dad and everything it meant to him and for what they'd been through together. So great stuff. I recommend it.
Buddy Baker's one of those, if you ever get to meet him, the last thing in the world you would ever dream out of Buddy is that there would be a tear in his eye.
That's what I mean. It was so unusual. And he even said this, look, guys, we've got to stop filming a minute. I'm getting a little caught up in this
Good for
stuff.
him.
No, it's great. Really good stuff.
One other list that has come out here recently, how about the Forbes magazine? This could be a dangerous list to be on because Forbes, of course, read by most every CEO from individual companies to great conglomerates throughout the world. But the Forbes magazine list of least liked athletes, most disliked athletes, however you want to word it.
Most disliked
athletes.
Yep.
Number 1, Lance Armstrong. Number 3, Tiger Woods. Number 5, one of my favorites, Meta World Peace. Basketball player out in LA who has been anything but peaceful in his lifetime. Michael Vick is number 7, and you know what? That's a blowback to the dogfighting.
Yep.
But number 8 on this list, NASCAR's own Kurt Busch. Larry, how did a Busch wind up on a least liked list?
You just hate to see something like that, don't you? The question is, how come he bumped his little brother off the list?
Well,
I would have thought Kyle might have been on there too. No, the Busch brothers, as I say, Joe, they've kind of worn out their welcome in a lot of circles. You know, everybody has bad days once in a while, but the Bushes tend to have a whole lot of bad days. Now, hopefully it's finally dawned on them. They got it through their thick skulls that they're about to blow awfully good racing careers. I mean, both of them are super talented drivers. Nobody can deny that. But they both seem like they've got that self-destructive streak in them, just like when Little Busch bashed the trophy guitar that night at the Super Speedway, almost got you with guitar shrapnel. You know, that might have been the lowest of the low points for both of them. But again, I guess the good news for Kyle Busch, he was bumped off the most disliked list by his big brother. Having said that, Joe, we were talking about off the air. Remember one time, one of these lists, Dale Earnhardt made both lists. He was in the same year. He was the most liked driver in NASCAR and the most disliked driver in NASCAR. I also remember when Howard Cosell made one of those lists. He was, one year Cosell was voted the most liked sportscaster in the nation, and on another list he was voted the most disliked sportscaster. So again, with Earnhardt, remember what Dale said, he doesn't care what the crowd does as long as they make a noise. So
do you take this from a standpoint of, I don't care, you know, as we used to tell you, Larry, I don't care what you're writing as long as you spell our name right. You know, it's the Speedway. Is this one of those deals where Kurt probably doesn't care whether you're saying good things or bad things, as long as you're talking about him?
No, it hurts, Joe, and I know Earnhardt used to laugh. He didn't care, you know, whether the boo or cheer as long as he gets a reaction. It does hurt. Darrell Waltrip's told me many times, he used to say the same thing. You know, Darrell, when he'd be introduced or even when he had a crash on the track, the crowd would just roar. They just tested Darrell, and Darrell would just laugh it off and, you know, say, I'll let them do what they want to do. They paid their money. I've got their ticket money. But Darrell said deep down, it just killed him. Darrell was pretty thin-skinned anyway after you peel away that rough exterior. Darrell was kind of a softy, and he said, it just killed him. And Stevie, his wife, would leave the track in tears sometimes, but people were yelling and hollering at Darrell. So sure, it hurts. They're athletes, and they enjoy being celebrities, and any athlete would rather be cheered than booed. So sure, it stings. They may shrug it off and try to say it doesn't, but it does. And so you can, I'm sure, Kurt, and more importantly in this sport, Joe, as you know, sponsors don't like to see their drivers on these kind of lists, most disliked lists. So it goes beyond just personal feelings. It's not good for business when you're one of the most disliked people in your sport, either when you have to rely on corporate sponsorships to pay your salary.
Kurt Busch will be driving for the Front Row Motorsports Group and they're still based out near Denver.
Yeah.
So they're in Colorado, traipsing the country every week.
One of those long, expensive hauls we were talking about in an earlier segment.
Yeah. So, Larry, you think being that far away from the center of all of it will help maybe take some of this edge on?
Probably not, because the focus will not be on where Kurt travels or where the team's based. The focus will be on Kurt every week once he gets to the racetrack, and so it's up to Kurt to clean up his act, to mind his manners. And I think he's making a concerted effort. And again, Joe, talking about this team he drives for, when he drove for James Finch some last year, Kurt turned in some of the best performances. He took a middle of the pack or back of the pack car and put it up front. I mean, he's a tremendously and has done the same thing with the Furniture Row car in some races last year. He can take a weak car and put it up front. So that's driving talent there. Nobody can dispute the talent of this kid. The question is, can he survive himself?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
We're going to have to survive ourselves for another segment. We'll come back because we're kind of making plans. We're going to take a break. We're going to make some plans. Maybe go down to the batter's box for a little lunch. I'm thinking breakfast is probably over, so you don't know what time it is, so it's okay. Breakfast is probably over. Lunch is coming up, but they'll do breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's at the batter's box, Hermitage Avenue, right here in Nashville. When we come back, several things to wrap up and get done as we close out this edition of Pit Pass. Stay with us.